So in the last video, you saw how tedious it can be drawing all these two force members into various free body diagrams. And what you can actually do is make this structure, we'll keep using the same structure, and analyze it and make it simpler by getting rid of members, because some members actually do not have any forces acting upon them, and I'll explain why. So I changed it up a bit. I added a force here and two forces here. So these are basically just reaction forces, F2 and F3, and this is an applied force, F1. And what I'm going to do is explain the concept of why some members are actually zero force members, meaning they don't have any forces acting upon them. So let's take, for example, this bar, or this two force member, or allegedly two force member, BD. So what we're gonna explode this into its diagram. So we're gonna say, let me change the color so it looks better. So we have this right here. This is point D, and then there's a reaction force because there's some bars here. There's a bar here, and there's gonna be a bar right here. So there's this fundamental concept that we've been studying for the past 40 or so videos, that the sum of the forces must equal 0, and the sum of the moments, the sum of the vector moments must equal 0. So that's just the basic idea of equilibrium. And we know that trusses consist of two force members. All right, and we understand what two force members are. So what we could do is, when we draw this free body diagram, we say that this force, let's say it's going in that direction and that direction. So this bar is actually in compression. So we draw that reaction force onto that joint, and then we'll continue the process. And what's important to know, that in the diagram, this is actually like a straight line. So these forces act on the same line of action. So what we can say is that if these forces are acting in this direction and these forces are acting in the same line of action, then that must mean these forces must add up to 0, because they are just like complements of each other, or opposites of each other. And what they do, they add up to 0 in this direction. So what happens is that you have this leftover force pointing in this direction because of this bar, and there's no other forces to balance it. And for this truss to be at equilibrium, the sum of the forces at these joints must equal 0. So if there's a reaction force due to this bar acting in this direction, there has to be some external force or an applied force to keep that bar in equilibrium, or the forces on this bar are added up to 0. So this is just the first example I want to go through. So right here, we can say that this bar, actually I should not use that, this bar right here has 0 forces acting upon it, because if it were to act on it, the forces along this axis, or this line of action, will actually cancel out each other because they lie on this same line. So because they're two force members, because two force members have forces that act in this line of action based on this diagram, and these forces must cancel out in this direction by using these two force members. So this horizontal member should not have a reaction force, because if it did, it will have a free body diagram that looked like this, which is unbalanced. Therefore, for it to be in equilibrium, this bar, or this two force member, or alleged two force member, is actually a 0 force member. So what we can do now is actually look at this diagram. So we know this is a two force member, so we can actually get rid of that. And then if you look at this bar right here, now we can just imagine this bar right here is not existing anymore. And now we could look at this joint B. So this two force member may be pointing in that direction and in that direction. So these forces must cancel out. So this reaction force that B is being applied at the point G, or the joint B, then this is acting in this direction, which doesn't cancel out with anything. So what we actually can say is that this 2 force member is 0, is actually a 0 force member. Now we're gonna look at a different point or a different thing, and we're gonna look at this point C. So if we look at this point C, which is very interesting, because you might think these are actually 0 force members because they act in different directions. So if we didn't have that applied force that is going right here, if we did not have that applied force, then yes, this would actually be a 2 0 force members. So they'll be pointing in that direction. So this particle or this joint is actually have reaction forces and going in that direction. And since they're going in that direction, the resultant force of this particle right here, or this joint, is actually pointing in that direction, or somewhere in that general direction, because these forces are at an angle with each other, and that will cause an imbalance or a vector sum of the forces not equaling 0. And if you're unsure why this by itself would actually be 2 force members, is because no matter how you draw this the reaction forces in this direction, or of these 2 force members, because they all lie in this general direction or this general direction. So you can actually draw them like going like this, maybe that's going that way, and this is still going that way. The resultant force would be in that direction. Or maybe you say this is actually in compression. So what you say, this is going that way, and you keep this force going that way. So the resultant force would actually point in this direction. No matter how you define the reaction forces, if there's no applied force, this joint right here will actually not be in equilibrium. So that would cause these members, for it to be in equilibrium, to be a 0 force member. Now, if we applied force in this direction, then we don't really know if this force or these 2 members are actually 0 force members. So to sum up this idea, if you have 2 force members and they're acting at angles with each other, so there's an angle here, so something like that, and there's no applied forces acting upon them, then you can say that these forces right here are 0 force members. 0 force members. So if they're acting upon each other, however, if there was let's say we take the same diagram, and there's a joint, and then here, and then there's a force being applied to them in that direction, then we do not know if this joint or these members are 0 force members. But if there is no applied force, then we can actually say that these members are 0 force members, meaning there's no forces acting through them. And that's just the basic concept of what 2 force members are. If you don't know what 2 force members are, then I recommend you to watch the video that I created a while back. So that's the basic idea, and it's very powerful because now we could simplify this problem and save some time by ignoring these members themselves. And we could draw the free body diagram that only consists of member A, B, and C C, D, and E for this top portion of this structure. We could ignore these 2 members right here. And that'll save time when drawing free body diagrams, and it'll save time when doing calculations. So if you understand this concept, it'll be very beneficial to you in terms of time saving and in terms of efficiency.